Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Conversation Online with Katya Soldak, director of The Long Breakup. This film will be shown as a part of our 20th anniversary festival, beginning September 19th and running through the 25th for our live portion, and beginning September 26th and ending October 2nd for our virtual screening portion. Please check out all the information about scheduling, ticketing, and all the events as part of the Global Peace Film Festival 20th Anniversary Festival at peacefilmfest.org. And now, please join me in welcoming Katya Soldak from The Long Breakup. Hello, Katya. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So Katya, wonderful to have you with us today. Why don't we start by telling us a little bit about The Long Breakup?
Well, The Long Breakup, it's a feature documentary. This is my first documentary feature film. It is about Ukraine's attempt to say goodbye to Russia. And I think it just sums it up. I can talk in detail what it is about, but the main idea of the film is to show how over the past 30 years of being an independent country, Ukraine and Ukrainian people were changing and separating from the shadow or from the dominance of Russia. And it also goes a little bit in detail into the whole history of the relationships between Russia and Ukraine, going back to the times when Russia, what now looks like colonized Ukraine. But what's important, this is not a historic documentary where there is a voice of God tells you this is what happened in, this and this year. It's actually about my family and myself and my friends, how we all lived in those times and how each historic global event affected them on a personal level, but also show a global scale of what was happening.
And Katya, you are a reporter in your day job, correct?
Not a reporter as much. I work as the editorial director for international editions of Forbes magazine, but my background is in journalism. I am a professionally trained journalist. I basically worked in journalism all my life. And this film definitely reflects that because all the facts are checked. It has a subjective perspective, of course, but it's not something that has not been verified. Every data, every piece of data, every year, every number has been triple checked, and it's not, a piece of fiction in that sense. Yeah.
And I think the thing that people will find so relatable about the way you approach this story, because as you mentioned, there's this long history to explain, and the fact that you really put your own family's journey over the number of years that you're recording this. I think it is so relatable, and I think anyone who maybe didn't know a thing about Ukrainian history will find a way to relate to your story. So can you tell us a little bit about that decision to put your family at the center of piecing this history together?
Of course. Thank you so much for this question, because first of all, I want to say this film was filmed over many years. I would say the first time I picked up a camera and went to Ukraine to do the first round of interviews, it was 2005. So by the time I finished the film, it was almost 12, 13 years in making. Some post-production took time, but actual filming took years and years. And Ukraine went through so much, and everybody in the film changed. And originally, I thought it would be a short film or shorter film about Ukraine having the Orange Revolution, which happened in 2004, and how the country changed and became pro-European, happy end. It didn't happen. By the time I finished the first round of interviews, it was clear that the revolution did not work the way people hoped, and I just kept filming. So my first interviews were mostly with experts, with even political analysts and some historians. I did film my family as well, but I never took it seriously. It's just, back then we didn't have iPhones to film everything. So I used the camera to shoot some scenes at home, maybe some talks with my mother, but I didn't intend to use it. It's not my thing. I'm a reporter. I'm used to be a relatively private person, no oversharing. So the best I could do is maybe an interview on camera or a stand-up. And then when I started later editing first drafts, first cuts, it was not really adding up. Like the story was not really working. Even though I did use myself as a narrator, it still was not enough. So I started doing test screenings with some film groups or some people, test screenings, people who didn't know much about Ukraine, and they all were asking me to put more of myself into this film. And I worked with this group, it's called Diverse Filmmakers Alliance. It's a group of filmmakers here in New York City. So they were very instrumental in helping me put the first cuts together, and they were basically forcing me. And I already said, guys, look, I'm already here. I'm already putting more. Like, you can see my family, you can see my kitchen. And they were like, no, we need more and more. And eventually, I think it's that push that made me say, okay, fine, for the sake of the story, I'm just going to expose myself, things I didn't want to, like, it's a big, this whole personal essay style things. I've heard that most filmmakers who end up doing that, they start with one thing where they want to be private and they just want to interview people on the subject. And then at the end, because it is a documentary film, it's not a news segment, it evolves into putting yourself out there. And another thing is that to document the transformation of Ukrainian people, you needed to spend a lot of time with these people, and all these experts and historians, as much as I respect them, they became irrelevant because a lot of things they used to say in 2006 or 7 or 10, it did not really make any sense later. But to watch actual evolution of people who used to be, who used to live one way, used to think one way of themselves, and then life forces them to change their views. And by the end of the film, you can actually see how even the toughest ones, they just realize something about themselves that was not possible to even imagine back then. You need to have access to characters long term. And then it becomes, my family again, who I never took seriously when I first started filming them, ended up being these really interesting characters who opened up, who gave me access to their lives. And it was not easy. They're my family, so they were not interested all the time in participation. At times they were annoyed and irritated, but, it became a very important journey that now actually is more important than ever. When people don't know much about Ukraine, they don't know, some people do, some people don't. In America, especially, a lot of people don't. Then there is the question of propaganda that was working against Ukraine for quite some time. And then you don't need to defend anything. You just I just show these people who change, and it speaks for itself.
Well, I want to thank you and thank your family for being so available, because it really does make the film so relatable. And in fact, I would say one of the things that surprised me, I suppose it shouldn't, and what I'm trying to say is the following didn't surprise me in a universal sense. People are people wherever you go. But what surprised me about watching the kind of political journey that your stepfather and your mother go through, that it reminded me of so many of the kind of archetypal voices and journeys of Americans. And I thought, I really hope that people see that connection, that this democracies are very difficult because they require a lot from their citizens. And I think it was a beautiful film that you got to show that difficulty, that people have who are serious about it, who are grappling with it.
I hope so too, that the American audience will see certain things that speak to American issues or to some issues in American society. And yes, you cannot take democracy for granted. You can see the country that is fiercely fighting for the right to choose, for the right to be independent, for the right to choose their own future. And most of Ukrainian people, especially back 10 years ago, they really did not have that formal education on that. It's not like, they said, oh, we're fighting for democracy. They were fighting for something that they wanted, and turns out that is called democracy. But on the human level, it means the right to choose, freedom, liberties, freedoms to move around, freedoms to speak what you want to say, what basic human rights are, even business freedom, to do business the way that market economy works. And it's not something that is imposed on people's minds by, let's say, like a big brother America, or brainwashed by some agents that come from the West. It's just the way that society develops and what's better for them. And that's how people want to rule. They want the rule of law, so they can actually operate and function like without, lots of issues and corruption. And I'm not saying that, everything worked out well, but that's what the inclination was, to live to be part of a big and free world. And in America, certain things change over the past couple of years. Even the views that people had, or certain vocabulary changed, and that's normal. And I think that also maybe for some people can open up eyes for that. Like, it's not unheard of that there is like a decade or 2 or 3 that everybody thinks this is appropriate and this is how it is. And then things change, people change, and certain realities have to change.
You had mentioned earlier that you had begun your approach to this film by talking to experts. There was one in particular, Professor Timothy Snyder,
Yes.
who you were talking to him about, what kind of criteria you would look for to define a country. And I thought, and I'm reducing what he said, so I really, ask everyone out there watching to watch the film and hear him say it himself. But his answer to you was that a lot of the criteria that we generally think of as making a country, he thought was less important than if the populace, for whatever their differences may be, felt they had a future together. And so I would ask you to speak about that, in terms of one of the reasons why I thought this film works so well for our festival is that at the center, our festival is about giving people not only knowledge and information about large issues, but also giving them a space where they feel as though they can take action, and where they feel as though they can contribute to their communities, things that they can take into their own lives. And I was just struck by that sense of, being able to feel a future together. And I'm just wondering, for people who see the film, what you would hope they would take away and carry back with them into their own lives and their communities.
It's a bigger question, so maybe I won't explore the direction that you had in mind, but what came to my mind now is that Ukraine is a big country, and it's a diverse country in all senses. I mean, it's a Slavic country for the most part, and the religion is mostly Christian Orthodox, but there is room for everybody, for people of different religions or different nationalities. It's a welcoming place, but it also welcomes a lot of diverse opinions. And because of the history and of the proximity to the tools of Russian propaganda, a lot of people had a lot of ideas that were not really working together. And there were a lot of arguments all the time, every time when there is and I'm sure that will speak to Americans, when there is any election coming up, the politicians would use the issue of the language or of anything that would divide people culturally or their opinions to escalate the difference in these opinions and even put people against each other. Very easy. But when the enemy in that case came in 2014 and the country was in danger, most people put their differences aside and they got united in a way that was not really imaginable. Because it's one thing to argue when there is no war or when you're in a safe place, and another thing when your home is in danger, your children are in danger, and then people were able to, not even consciously, it's the move, like it's something that internally motivated people. They put differences aside and they faced together the danger and united to protect Ukraine. And I'm talking about 2014, when the hot war, the one that's happening right now, it was only taking place in some parts of Ukraine, but not all over the country. But that was enough for a lot of people to stop arguing and focus on what's important, and also change as well. So I think for communities, especially, you know, America is a very diverse country, much more diverse than Ukraine. And it's, you know, very easy to get stuck in your bubble and think that you're right and only my opinion matters. And there are a lot of things working to create these bubbles and to put people against each other and play on all these like really, you know, very easily triggering human instincts, you know, bad ones too, like hatred or violence. And I don't know what it takes, but in the Ukrainian case, it took actual military invasion to focus on important things. And then, you know, new things come out of it, and unity brings the best in people.
So that is such an important point, and so so relevant to what's happening today, both in Ukraine and the divisions that we're seeing in the United States. I just wanted to ask how your family is doing now, you know, with what's going on, and also as we start to wrap up this interview, what can people do to support your film, your work? What are you working on now? Are you going to present something more, update the film, or do something about the current context in Ukraine, the war that's going on now?
Okay, so the first one, my family is here in the United States. I asked them to leave as soon as the war started. Even before it started, they didn't want to leave, but we are from Kharkiv. Kharkiv is on the border with Russia, and it became a target for military escalation very, very quickly, and things are still very bad there. We're speaking right now, it's August 10. And Kharkiv has been bombed and shelled every day. So they're still here, even though every day my family wants to go back. It's a conversation pretty much every couple of days that they want to go back, but they see what's happening to the city and they're still here. In terms of the work that I do now, I am not filming anything because I've been doing a lot of work with this film. Turned out that, I mean, I wish it didn't happen, but my film became very useful to explain the context behind this war and behind the relationship of between Ukraine and Russia that people cannot get from the news. So ever since the war escalated, I have been showing this film around with different groups, community groups, universities, festivals, and TV channels in Europe. It's been all over in many channels like Arte TV and a lot of public channels. So that requires a lot of work, and also, you know, explaining things or discussions, anything. Sometimes we bring people from any organizations that are helping Ukraine, and they give updates on what's happening. So it's a very time-consuming work in addition to my other full-time job, where we are actually covering the war, and Forbes Ukraine is our partner in Ukraine, provides us with daily news updates about Ukraine, and it is very important to keep Ukraine in the news because the war goes on. It's been 6 months. I don't think it's going to be over, tomorrow or a few days from now or a few weeks from now, but people do get tired from the same subject, and especially in America, we have so much going on. Every couple of days, there is something that's extremely important for American society, for the world, that it's very easy to move on and forget, but people are dying in Ukraine all the time. Children are dying, children are injured. It's a nightmare. It's basically genocide that's happening on Ukrainian soil, and war crimes are happening every single day. So my job right now is to keep Ukraine in the news to my best ability, just like many other journalists are doing. But there are documentary filmmakers in Ukraine, and I'm sure there will be some beautiful Western documentary filmmakers. There will be some beautiful and probably tragic and very, very important films coming out of this war for audience, but they're not going to be done by me because I am doing other things. But what I think would be great if this film, even though it is, I finished it in 2020, so there is no current war in it. There are no scenes of devastation. There are no scenes of children and people dying the way they are now, and all these crimes and tortures. People will see Ukraine the way it was before the war, how beautiful it was, the real people, not victims, not injured people, but how they lived, what they did. It's important. I'm glad that I was able to capture Ukraine pre-war, because now it's going to be a very different country after the war, but we have that. And the evolution, the contemporary history, the past 30 years of Ukraine building itself as an independent country and society that developed, it just happened that I documented it and I have it. So I would like for this film to be seen, even though it's not showing all these, footage, all the footage that people see in the news now. And it might seem like current is also important, but I think it's important to know where it all comes from and what kind of people are fighting right now. So I would love for this film to keep screening, or channels that might be interested in it here in the US. I don't think the film got enough exposure, even though it's got so much, but it's not enough. So I'm gonna just ask if anyone wants to see the film can reach out to me, or if there is any distributor or a channel that wants to take this film and show it. We are open for conversations on this.
Well, thank you so much, Katya. And Nina and I couldn't agree more about the importance of the film. And I'm taken aback a bit emotionally thinking about what you had just said about what you were able to capture, and I think it's a gift, to the Ukrainian people that you've captured what you have. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you for everyone who listened to The Glow today. Please do, if you want to learn more information, please consider checking out Katya's website, thelongbreakupfilm.com, or reaching out to her via Facebook, and it's facebook.com/thelongbreakup. So please do use those two avenues in order to reach out and connect with Katya over the film and over these particular issues. And please do go to peacefilmfest.org to check out the schedule of when the film will be showing. Again, our dates begin September 19th through the 25th for the live in-person portion of our program. And then we pick up September 26th through October the 2nd for our virtual screenings. Thank you again, and we'll see you at the next Glow.